Hey, it's Paul. This week, Sonya and I talk all about what actually goes into the proposal. This is the first step for anybody that wants to be an author, and Sonya and I compare what went into my first proposal and then look at the very different aspects that went into my second proposal. There's tons of useful information here and some pretty cool stories. If you like any of them and want to hear more, don't forget to sign up for my newsletter at paulkicksnewsletter.com. If you like this episode, or really the whole conceit behind this season of Now That's a Great Story, don't forget to rate and review it on iTunes. Let's get straight into the episode. Hey, it's Paul. Welcome to the new season, season number 2, episode number 1 of Now That's a Great Story. This season, we're going to be going deep on a single subject, how to write a book, covering everything from the very early stages through the research, through the writing, all the way up until you actually launch your book. And what is this going to coincide with? Well, guess what? I have just started to research my own book, the second book, and I thought it would be kind of cool to have a sort of week-by-week synopsis of like what's going on in my life as a way to sort of teach you about how you can do this if you're thinking about it at any point in the future, if you want to do it, if you're just sort of curious about it. So I'm joined today by my wife, Sonya. Hi, Sonya. How are you? Hello. All right. So she's here today because she is the best BS check that I have in my life. She's the thing. I mean, she got the dedication in book number 1 for a reason, because she has been there, and she will be here today to sort of provide great context. Right, Sonya?
Yep.
Great context as well. All right, so let's get into how to get a book proposal. And the best way to try to relay how to get a book proposal is going to probably be through my own experience. All right, so let's start at the beginning. And what is the beginning of actually writing a book? Well, the beginning is you have to be fascinated by a subject. You have to be fascinated enough to want to do the story. So the last time it was Robert de la Rochefoucauld, and you guys have probably heard me in season number 1 talk a lot about the saboteur, but this time I want to talk about the civil rights movement, and in particular the Birmingham Campaign of the civil rights movement. Why did I like that so much? Well, for a couple of reasons. Number 1, it was riveting stuff. It was just fascinating to take in. These were people who, against all odds, were able to go into the most racist, most segregated city in the U.S. and begin to enact civil rights legislation that then led to the Civil Rights Act of 1964. So just in the broadest parameters, it's sort of interesting because there's a conflict there. But then the deeper you get into it, and we will get into it fairly deep as a way to teach you in your own life how to perhaps write a book. But the deeper I got into it, the more fascinated I got, because it was filled not just with Martin Luther King as a protagonist and Bull Connor as a racist antagonist, but King's deputies who faced so many odds and were able to succeed at a time when really everybody around them, even their own circle, didn't think that success was possible. They were able to bring in other people to help carry out this campaign. The campaign itself was known as the Children's Crusade. I mean, look, the point is, and again, we'll go deep into this in subsequent episodes about like how to structure research, all this other stuff. But the point of all this is the first step to writing a book is to become obsessed with the topic. And I got obsessed with the topic long ago, probably because I was, as a white guy, I was trying to understand like what it would mean to raise black children. Sonya's black, I'm white. And the photos, the videos, you've seen those videos of those kids literally getting fire hosed from Birmingham. You've probably seen those photos of kids getting attacked by canine German shepherds. I became obsessed with those images, and that obsession led me to this obsession with understanding the Birmingham Campaign in a way that I think I can relay better than any other book that's been written. And again, we'll get there in subsequent episodes. But the first step is to get obsessed with a topic. And Sonya, for how long have we been talking about the Birmingham Campaign?
Oh, I mean, I know we've talked about it, pretty frequently. I would say it comes up in conversation a lot, especially given the context of what's going on in the world right now. It's a conversation that we've had just between the two of us. And then when you got the idea to turn it into a book.
And that idea, like, it predated even the Saboteurs release.
Probably. I read Pillar of Fire. No, Parting the Waters. I read
Branch's
that one first,
book,
quite a while ago. So, the similarities between the civil rights movement and all the movements that are going on right now has been a frequent topic of discussion.
Yeah. And that's the other thing. Like, this book that I want to write, it's going to, in some ways, it's going to encapsulate what's happening right now as a way to reflect what was happening back then, almost 60 years ago. So again, another topic that we will get to in another episode. But start with the obsession, all right? And then once you have that obsession, you have to do something. And the first thing you have to do is you have to research it, right? And you can't just research it like a week at a time. Okay, so I don't actually think that the Birmingham Campaign book, Sonya, is a very good barometer of this. I think actually the Saboteur would be a better way to sort of guide people, because I had been reading about the Birmingham Campaign forever, right? Mm-hmm. So it wasn't as if I set aside separate times to really now research it in depth, though I would ultimately. But the Saboteur is probably a better model for just the next step of the research itself. So I remember the Saboteur being like 4 or 5 months worth of research.
That was intense.
What was it like? Intense. What was it like for you?
It was very intense because you had, it was an obituary. So you had just really basic information about this extraordinary man. And then you did a deep dive to find out enough material to support a proposal, which was...
And that took months. It was...
Months.
I remember it being October of whatever that year would have been, like 2013, where you and I sat down one night. We're like, okay, we've got to go seriously at this. And the first thing we had to do is we had to find Robert's... he had written a memoir, but it had not been translated into English. So we had to first find the memoir, which was its own task. And then because neither of us spoke fluent French, we had to find somebody who would translate it for us.
Right.
And then we had to search for records to back up what he was saying. And we had to begin to contact the family, and we had to look for sort of supporting documents as well. I want to say it was maybe March of the next year before I was researching. Does that square with your recollection too?
It's quite possible. It was a very intense, but I think, what you said about being obsessed, I mean, you were obsessed with this topic and really understanding Robert and who he was. And because you were obsessed, I mean, I was right there with you. And it was something that we had to do as a family, particularly that one, because you needed my help. It was just the two of us. So having an understanding, as a spouse of what you were doing and being a part of it like that, I think really helped me go through that with you, because that was a long time and the kids were really small, and
yeah, it
was tough, but it was rewarding. I remember you finding out information and you getting so excited, I mean, that's kind of the momentum, I think, that kept us both going.
Yeah, because there's no guarantee, right? At that stage, you're like, okay, I hope that somebody might be interested in this, but you just have to sort of take a flyer on yourself and say, okay, I'm gonna have not only obsession, but I'm gonna have the confidence to begin to carry this out. So if you have both of those, if there's a subject matter that you are obsessed with, if there's a sort of single story that you think you can tell well, then that's a great sign that you can actually begin to write a book proposal. Okay, so once you've done that research, the book proposal tends to be broken down into 3 or 4 major components. And I'm going to try to relay these to you, not only in the sort of dry, abstract way, but try to tell my own story as a way to relate what it's like. All right, so the first step is the overview. And the overview is sort of like, if you're a magazine writer or if you're a newspaper writer, the overview is that 1,000 word opening section, or that extended anecdote in your newspaper feature story or sort of online feature story that just grabs the reader. It's some of the best of the best stuff that you have. In the current book, I used a photo of this guy, this kid, this 15-year-old kid getting attacked brutally by a German Shepherd. And in the saboteur, I used Robert trying to plot his escape from his own execution as the means to try to write that overview. And like Sonya, you've been with me, we've been together, we've been basically inseparable since 2003 when we started dating, right? But you have, from the start, even our dating life has coincided. We're both journalists. It's overlapped with our writing lives. And what is it like for you to know that, okay, now I'm sitting down to write the proposal?
Well, when we met, you remember when we met, you were in the middle of writing a story. So, I mean, as a journalist, you know, I understood the importance, but you've always written long format, and I wrote much shorter stuff. But I learned right away that when you sit down to write, it's a process. I mean, you disappear. It's something that you need to focus on wholeheartedly. And when you sat down to write the proposal, it was the say. I mean, you've always done that. It's what you focus on.
Yeah, and it wasn't like, okay, so let's just take that 1,000-word, and it's probably somewhere around 1,000-word overview, probably somewhere like that. It isn't like with that aspect or any subsequent aspect of the book proposal process, it isn't like it's undying focus, right? I actually don't think that's helpful. I think you should be writing no more than 2 or 3, maybe 4 hours at a stretch and trying to really understand, like, just put away all distractions, right? You know, be focused on the work that you need to do and just try to write the best you can and do that every day. I always have a goal of like just 500 words a day. If I can put 500 new good words down, that's good process. That's good. That's good for me because I have a day job too, right? Like a lot of you out there may be thinking, how can I do this and hold a day job? Well, we're going to dedicate a whole episode to that in the future, but believe me, you can. It's just a matter of time management. So the first step is, again, writing that great overview, somewhere around 1,000 words, maybe 1,500, but just this great moment from your research that you think is going to really grab the editors at various publishing houses and hold their attention. All right, the next thing is the author's bio. And this wasn't so important on the second book because publishers tended to know who I was, but I kind of sweated that author's bio the first go round. And I remember my agent telling me, you know, this should not be some sort of CV. This is not a resume. Write through that bad boy, like make it as interesting as you can and also make it as short as you can, because the last thing you want is to go on and on and on with, and then I did this, and then I did that. Make it a story about your life, which is hard. Like it's hard to do. But let's say that you do it. It's an important step, and you'll have a lot of stabs at it. I mean, Sonya, not just those first two components, but the proposal as a whole. You read the saboteur proposal. You read that like multiple times before we handed it in, right?
Maybe twice.
Did you read the Birmingham one before I sent it in? I think I sent it to you, didn't I?
I did. I read it. I think by the time I read it, it was ready to go.
Well,
so I
also,
didn't see
yeah,
other drafts.
And also because that one had some sort of like personal family stuff in it too, which is hopefully, if this book works, like it's going to be not only history, but a bit of sort of personal history or memoir. So I wanted you to read it for that. But regardless, you want that stuff to move fast, right?
Well, I think one thing that I think that was kind of interesting, an exchange that we had for the first book, was when you were writing the proposal, when you were writing the chapters, you were writing it like you write a magazine story, like very thoughtful. You have a very specific audience in mind. And so I always encouraged you to think a little bit differently. You need to think for the every man and woman walking into the bookstore, picking up this book and what makes it interesting. And so a lot of that was just rhythm and getting it to move very quickly. Yeah. Which is not necessarily, in your writing, when you write your stories, there's time that you put into building characters and building scenes and creating moods, and the writing that you did for the Saboteur. I mean, yes, you have to do that, but it's, I think, at a much quicker pace.
Especially for the proposal.
Right. Especially for the proposal. And to pick out a scene and write something like a chapter is, it's hard. I mean, how do you pick out? I mean, Robert had such an incredible life.
Yeah. To
pick out that one moment and try and write about it and make it exciting. And then to kind of learn right then and there, like baptism by fire, like how do you write a compelling book chapter if you've never written one before, and how do you get that rhythm?
So that's a great segue, because that's actually like, that's the third component of the book proposal process. There's basically 4 parts of it. And then that one is the sample chapter. And Sonya's right. Like, generally speaking, you want that sample chapter to read like a magazine story. It needs to have a beginning and a middle and an end, and it needs to be separate from the overview. It needs to be another moment from your research. It needs to be another moment from your subject's life, or from, if it's like a group portrait, you get the idea, right? It needs to be something else. It needs to also, to Sonya's point, it can't be drawn out and take forever. So I think probably 4,000 words is probably at the high end of what you should be doing. You may want to do it instead in like 2,500 or so. And so for me, the Saboteur one was actually easy because Sonya's right. Robert led such an amazing life that had just this, I was just like, wow, what sort of war did this guy fight? That it was actually easy to choose. So I chose for the sample chapter another episode in which Robert had to escape prison. This time he had to kill guards that he was in the prison with as a way to escape and get back to the resistance. So for me, once I knew that, okay, I had this first escape where he escaped his own execution, I began to think, okay, can I get a second moment that's just as compelling? And it happened that Robert's life was just as compelling there. The sample chapter for the Birmingham one was a little bit different because I wanted to show all 4 characters. There's going to be 4 protagonists in this book, and I wanted to show them, they are, Martin Luther King, Wyatt Walker, Fred Shuttlesworth, and James Bevel. I wanted to show them interacting with each other. And so we basically chose this moment in early May 1963 where everything that they have been working toward that entire spring comes to fruition, and it is both horrifying to witness, and it is awe-inspiring to witness, and it literally changes the course of history. It became really the first sort of viral video. And so I knew I had all of those moments, and it was just a matter of piecing that all together. And that probably was around 3,500 to maybe 4,000 words. I wouldn't want to press it too much bigger, to make it too much bigger than that. I just had to include all of those 4 central characters in something, show them interacting with each other. All right, so that's sort of the sample chapter. The next part is the chapter by chapter outline. And this is the last part. And this is honestly, and I think even book publishers know this, this is the part where if you're a nonfiction writer, you're kind of winging it. Because even if you've done 3 or 4, or in the Saboteur's case, 6 months worth of research, you actually haven't done that much research yet. Certainly not as much as you're going to end up doing over the course of the book. And so you need to think about, all right, where might this book go based on the existing research that I've done? And it's almost like you're making it up, because it's at one of those points where you don't know what you don't know. You don't know the sort of things you're going to encounter over the course of the research. And so as a result of that, you don't know how that might change your outline. And so you just have to sort of write something based on, all right, this is basically what I have right now, and I think the book will go from chapter 1 will cover this, chapter 2 will cover this, chapter 3 will cover this. It can be chronological. You can try to tell a book in a slightly different way. Like, again, for this Birmingham book, I'm thinking right now, and maybe, the deeper we get into this season, I'll find that this isn't the right way to go about it, but I'm thinking right now that it should open with a sort of present day moment of me looking at like what this spring and summer of 2020 has wrought in terms of social and racial injustice, and then bring it back to the Birmingham campaign. So it might be something like, you know, after George Floyd was killed, Sonya, we had to talk a lot with the boys because, you know, George Floyd, that was a viral video. What happened in Birmingham, those were viral videos, maybe the first viral videos ever. And what we had to talk about with the boys was, our twins are 9 now. Like, this was the first time we didn't close them off to that. And we did that for a reason. We wanted them to see what basically they're going to have to encounter in their lives. And I remember this one exchange where one of our sons, you know, he's like, we'll just have to be careful when we interact with cops. And I sort of paused because, you know, George Floyd had been careful. He had pleaded with the cops. Breonna Taylor had been careful. She'd been sitting there behind a locked door when cops busted in on her. There's, you know, Ahmaud Arbery had been careful. He'd just been going out for a jog in coastal Georgia when he was gunned down by white racist vigilantes. So, like, this is something that has long been a part of the understanding that Sonya and I have about what it means to be a black person. And it might very well influence the opening, probably the prologue, maybe even the first chapter of the book. And I just remember like a ton of tough conversations, but also, Sonya, at a certain point, we were like, we should probably include this.
Yeah, I mean, there's no way to tell this story, I don't think, without including at least some of our story to give it context, to really relate to people how much, you know, this means to us, how personal it is. But I also think that you make a really, not to kind of jump away a little bit, but a really good point about how dynamic you know, this whole process is. I mean, what you write in the proposal, the ideas that are important to you, maybe are not the same ideas. I mean, as you go through it, there are things that you discover and learn, things that become much more important to you, things that you discover that are now incredibly important that you want to include. So, you know, my thought when you did the first proposal for the saboteur was that everything you wrote for the sample chapter or the outline, you know, like of what all the chapters would be exactly how the book would turn out.
That wasn't the case at all.
Not the case at all. Not the case at all. So I think having that understanding, you know, if I were going to write a book, you know, like you're putting your best effort out there with the information you have right now.
Yeah.
And as it evolves, so does that information.
And, you know, again, I think almost every publisher is aware of that. So they are sort of aware that there's a wink, wink, nod, nod game being played here about those actual sample chapters. But the reason that you include them is because it gives the editors who will be bidding on your book, and we'll talk about bidding on your book and what that process is like soon in another episode, but it gives them a sense for, all right, what sort of thinker is this person? Does this writer have a sense not only for the immediate stories that I'm reading here, but the larger narrative he, she, they want to tell? That's critically important, and that's what the sample chapters can do. Okay, so we'll discuss this in the next episode in greater detail, but I guess maybe the place to end today's discussion is on what happens next. All right, so what happens next is you write the whole thing out. And people are like, how long should the proposal be? And the reality is, man, it really doesn't matter, right? Like, some proposals are maybe 20 pages and maybe 7,000 words in total. Other proposals are 15,000 words and 50 pages. It's just whatever you think is essential to relay everything that you want to relay. And then you send it to your agent. And then your agent, the two of you, go back and forth. I mean, hopefully you have other readers too. I'm lucky enough to have my wife read it. So she's been incredibly important throughout this process. So next time we're going to talk about that process of having your agent read it. And then we're going to talk about that process of actually agreeing on what you want to send out and then sending it out to the publishers, and what happens when you send it out to publishers, and what happens when you meet with them, and then what happens after you meet with them. All right. So like I'm trying this season to detail as many steps in the process as we can so you can get a sense for how to do it yourself. Right. All right.
Right.
I think that's a pretty good place to stop, right?
I think it's a great place to stop.
Okay.
Come on next week.
I think you probably will be coming on next week. I think Sonya might be. I mean, I would love to hear from the audience what they think of you.
I would love to be a co-host.
Paul and Sonya. Well, it might very well happen. We'll see. All right. So until next time, this is Paul Kicks.
And Sonya Kicks.
This is season 2. Now that's a great story. We'll be back. Bye-bye. Hey, thanks for listening. If you like this season of Now That's a Great Story, or just getting caught up on the first, the best way to keep in touch is through the newsletter, paulkicksnewsletter.com. There, you'll get even more advice on how to be the best writer and storyteller you can be. In fact, right now, I've got a free PDF for you. The 7 rules top long-form writers follow to make more money from their stories. Sign up for the newsletter and you'll get the free PDF. Head there now, paulkicksnewsletter.com.